Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers, welcome to the second part of the recap of Day 5 in the Brendan Banfield trial. After lunch, still on the stand was Leanne Singley. She's the one that works with the Bloodstain pattern analysis. They start off talking about Joe's position on the ground, and she disagreed with the Commonwealth's expert that blood was deposited on Joe's arm while he was laying on the ground. Just before lunch, she said that due to the fact that his arm hair had impacted the way the blood landed, she could not tell what position he was in when that was deposited. She explains a drip stain is formed by gravity alone. And on top of that, if you have something circular, it's not automatically a drip stain when blood is going through the air in an arc shape. And if it doesn't hit anything when it falls to the ground perpendicular, it's still going to look circular. But because we did not have a lot of these features, that's why she didn't do her classification. And to say that they're coming from above and that they are drip stains is part of the problem. She said just because his arm was this way when he was found, his arm could have been in a different position when that blood was deposited. For her to make a classification, she would look at the size, the location, the distribution, and the appearance of the stain to determine if it's a drip stain opposed to another kind of stain. She would want to see something that is perfectly circular with scalloping around the edges, and it has some size to it. If it's tiny, she's going to classify it as something that came from a spatter as opposed to a passive drop. She's asked, in the absence of additional information, how do you resolve that? They start off at bloodstains and then spatter, then cast off, then impact. If they don't have the features to meet each level, like in this case, she would just say they're bloodstains. And in her report, she described them as being irregularly shaped and three-dimensional on the arm. On cross, the Commonwealth, you don't have enough information to go to that next step, but it doesn't mean that the next step isn't a possibility. Is that right? The witness says she doesn't consider that. With not being able to go beyond the classification, she stopped. But the Commonwealth says just because you stopped, that leaves all of the other options still available and nothing is excluded, including drops from above, and the witness agrees with that. Commonwealth, the lab tested Joe's pants. You said the sample was the pull from the jeans and they avoided stains. Did you read in the report the sample was positive for blood? The witness says it didn't say it was positive. They did a presumptive positive test and blood was indicated. And that was the last question for her. She is subject to recall. The next witness was Brendan Miller. He was the forensics expert for the Fairfax County Police Department. However, he was reassigned because he was one of the investigators who thought Christine was in control of her devices. Personally, I think it would have been smarter for the Commonwealth to call him as a witness and just have him say, yeah, that was my determination originally, but after the proffer, I changed my mind. And we could have avoided a lot of this, but here we go. He was the digital forensics examiner for this case, and that changed about a year ago. He had been in digital forensics since about 2019. They have him look at an executive summary he wrote as the digital forensics examiner for the devices in this case. That was all they asked at this point, but he does get back on the stand for a length of time here soon. Up next, Harold Lidsky. He's a private investigator for the defense. The first part of his review focused on the digital forensics. He was given 8 terabytes on a hard drive. When he came on the case, the theory of catfishing had been assigned and Brendan had already been indicted and arrested. So first, he wanted to confirm or refute the catfishing theory. He evaluated Christine's devices. He watched Brendan and Juliana's interviews. He looked at all the social media, email, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, Google, Apple. He looked at all the crime scene photos, autopsy photos, reports, and pretty much everything available to him. He looked at the catfishing with a date range beginning January 9th of 2023 through February 24th, which is the date of the murders. He mentions the discussion about getting new windows and also things that predated that. He said what happens before the event is vital to see who was doing what on the device. What was the user doing? What was the system registering? A communication about window replacement was initiated by Juliana. He performed a keyword search for that. There was an objection. And when they came back to it, they just continued on to something else. He looked at the raw data for the service providers, as far as FetLife, Google, Apple, Facebook, Instagram. But for the computer and the mobile devices, he was not given the raw data. He was given the work that was done through Celebrate and the investigator. So he would not say that he was given the raw data for the devices themselves. At this point, this is when they recall the previous witness, Brendan Miller. He explains how they stabilize devices based on various factors. For example, if he gets a computer and is powered off, he would remove the hard drive and then connect that to a forensic machine and a blocker, which keeps anything else from being changed on that hard drive. He takes a forensic image and creates an evidence file, which is put into another program that makes everything readable. When these initial reports are ran, it looks like a bunch of numbers and letters. So you have to put it into something else to make it to where you can read it. January 9th, 2023 was the day the Gmail account was created that eventually was used to sign up for FetLife. When he's doing a case, he looks at a pattern of life to see if there's enough there to show who did what. But he also says it's impossible to put anybody behind a screen. In his conclusion initially, he considered all the information he had at that time, and what was the most likely scenario he determined? That Christine was using that device. I feel really dirty saying this, but in theory, their plan was one of the smarter plans I've seen in a long time to make it look like she was home and using that device. And we see a few detectives believed that initially. On January 17th of 2023, that FetLife account was created. His conclusion was that Christine's phone was used to create the FetLife account, and he concluded she had not lost her device, meaning she would have been the one to do it. But that opinion changed since Juliana admitted to using the phone, but he does acknowledge the forensic report itself didn't change. He said the additional information was something he had to take into account, and that context is very important. Defense, is there something other than her admission, meaning the analysis you did on the device that changed? No. October 25th, 2024 is when Juliana first confessed. Did you see conflict with your digital forensics findings and her confession that day? He said nothing that came to mind. He's asked if he saw where Juliana was asked by investigators if someone was on FetLife on a certain day. And he does remember that part of the interview. Do you have any idea why he asked that? He says he can't speak to why people ask things in an interview. The defense asked if he could have been involved in questioning Juliana. Could he have helped the investigators? He said he would have liked to have been involved, but he didn't know until after it had taken place and he wasn't asked. What information did they get from you to help with their questioning? Again, he said nothing, because I didn't know they were interviewing her. After the interview, he was asked to review his work in light of Juliana's proffer and be sure that he could explain what he put in his executive summary. The defense points out, again, the data didn't change. And then he's asked if that's why he was transferred. He said there was discussion about his transfer, and it was related to his work in this case. Looking at January 18th through February 23rd, there are discussions in your report. Do you stand by the same conclusions that you had in your bullet points? And he says yes, and that would just be the data itself. Defense, the only change is Juliana gave a different story, and the witness says additional evidence came to light. February 18th, 2023, 10:42 p.m., the data shows Christine used the device. The only change is that Juliana changed her story? Yes. He asked about other dates, same answer. Have you ever heard the phrase, digital forensics don't lie, but people lie? And the witness says yes. Who asked you to change your executive summary? The witness says he wasn't asked to change it, but just to review it after the proffer. Were you able to challenge her on what she said? No. Do you believe she was challenged on what she said during her proffer? The witness says it's relative. He can't speak to what the person asking the questions was thinking at the time. He asked this 10 Ways to Sunday if Juliana was challenged, and the witness said it was more of a free-form interview. On cross, you said it's impossible to put someone behind a screen. Correct. After additional information, you would have changed that from Christine using her phone or laptop to Christine's device was being used, and he said yes. Were you aware there were 2 interviews with Juliana, and the second one was in February? Yes. He also knows nothing about what went into what questions she was asked. On a redirect, do you know why you were not called in the Commonwealth's case? And the witness says, I can't speak to someone's motivation for not including me. You don't know with certainty who is behind the device, and the witness says the only time you know for sure is when someone admits it or there is a corroborating factor. And that was the end of the day. If you think about it, Juliana was not arrested until October, and then Brendan that next September. So who can fault this witness for looking at the forensics from the devices and saying, it would make the most sense that she had her devices and she was doing this until Juliana confesses. All right, that is it for today. Hope you guys have a good rest of your evening. We will see you soon.